Hi guys, this is Lauren with Watkins Art, and today I'm going to show you how I created this painting of a raven using soft pastels. I started out by photoshopping several images together, and then once I was happy with how it was looking, I traced that image on my Procreate app and then printed it onto printer paper. I then taped those pieces of paper together and then transferred it onto my sanded paper by using carbon paper. I find that carbon paper is the best for transferring onto sanded paper because it doesn't smudge, but I can also completely cover up those lines with pastel layers over the top. Sorry I didn't get any footage of that part of the process because I was just in the art mode and I was not thinking about cameras and camera angles or anything at that point. I was just excited to work on this project. But once I got the image transferred onto my sanded paper, then it was time for the underpainting. And I'm doing my underpainting using Bombay India inks from Dr. P.H. Martin's. I love to use alcohol inks for my underpaintings when I'm using a paper that can handle wet media, because you can get such vibrant colors without filling in the tooth of the paper. They dry quickly. They're just a joy to use. Sometimes I will do a solid underpainting where I'll just tone the whole paper one color. Other times I will patchwork it like I am on this one. For the bird, I used diluted mixes of the colors that I used in the background. So I just added a little bit of rubbing alcohol to the inks and I applied that to the underpainting of the bird. I made sure that I was using colors that were in the background on its feathers because the bird is going to be reflecting the colors around it. So I wanted the pinks and the purples and the blues and the yellows to be showing up on its feathers. Once I got that base underpainting done, then I started going in and blocking in a little bit of the detail within the bird, mostly just blocking in where the shadows are going to lie, and anywhere that I want to dilute it out or soften the lines that I put down, I just take a brush dipped in rubbing alcohol and just blend it out a little bit before the ink completely dries. I really like using underpaintings when I am working with soft pastels, especially when I'm working on Uart sanded paper because it really only comes in this light beige or in a black form. And I don't really like working with pastels directly on beige paper too often. I like to tone it in some way. And for this piece, I wanted to make sure if any pastel particles fell off the paper, the underpainting kind of mimicked what I was already drawing, and so it wouldn't distract from the piece, especially because it's so dark. I could have done this on the black Uart paper, but I don't have black Uart paper on this scale, so I had to use the tan one. So now I'm going in with pan pastels, and if you're not familiar, pan pastels are an ultra soft pastel that is so soft that it can't be made in stick form like your traditional pastels. And so they come in a pan shape, almost like an eyeshadow, and then you apply them to your paper using sponges. Their sponges are called soft tools, and that's what you're seeing me use. And they're like a palette knife where they have a sponge attached to the end, and the sponge is washable and you can change them out. But I'm just applying my pan pastels over the top of my underpainting, and I'm just mimicking what I laid down before. So like a magenta close to the sun, and then as I work my way out, it's going to transition to like a red violet, violet to purple, and then from purple to blue to navy blue, black, that kind of a gradient effect. I want it to look almost like it's a blood moon, and so I'm going to be adding a lot of oranges and yellows and pinks to the moon itself, and I want to create like this glowing effect around it, so I'm incorporating magentas and violets and things like that to give it that glow. And it's also going to provide a lot of fun opportunities to incorporate other colors into the raven's feathers and not just have them be like black and gray and white. I'm going to be reflecting the colors of the sky in his feathers, and it's just going to create a lot more visual interest overall. I just continued to blend my pastels out and just work on that gradient. And then once I was happy blocking it in, I grabbed a larger soft tool sponge. So they come in palette knife form, but you can also get like large dense sponges from this company. And I use that large sponge to kind of help get a more soft gradual gradient. And I tipped my board forward just a little bit to make it so any excess pastel dust fell onto my mat underneath my easel instead of onto the paper itself. You don't want to be blowing on your paper that much because you don't want to get pastel particles in your face and in your lungs, especially because oftentimes artist grade ones are made with pigments that aren't great for our bodies. And so by knocking it onto the floor where you can mop it up later or have a catch tray underneath is a much healthier option. Once I was happy with the background, then I started blocking in the moon, and I'm just going in with my pale yellows and peaches and just kind of blocking in the different shapes and colors. And I'm sorry for the focus on this. This is my first time working on the easel, and I didn't realize my camera was going to have an issue with the auto-focusing so much because it doesn't do that as much on my normal projects. But once I did a little bit of blocking in on the moon, I decided I wanted to kind of add a little bit of something special to the sky and kind of create this like circular visual interest. And so I took my sponge and I dipped it in this like cobalty blue color. And I just like gently added that around the moon in kind of this spiral pattern. And it's not evenly blended. You see more brush strokes, and I feel like that kind of helps draw your eye in a more interesting way. I also did it with a little bit of the black pan pastel just to add a little bit more depth. This is just a lot of back and forth, trying to get my values right. And some of it I could gauge a little bit better once I got some of the colors in the moon in. And then I'll go back and tweak it a little bit more once I start blocking in more of the raven itself. While I would categorize this as a pastel painting, I do use colored pencils for part of it. I'm mostly using the Caradosh Luminance colored pencils because they are more light fast, but I do throw in a few of the Faber-Castell Polychromos, but I'm just using those for the initial block-in layers of detail, and then I'll switch to my pastel pencils. This really started because I had a better colored pencil collection to choose from than pastel pencil collection when I was younger. And so I was just utilizing what I had, and I actually enjoy using colored pencils more on sanded paper than a traditional paper. I think I was also just enjoying being able to use colored pencils again. I was recently diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and just a couple months ago, I wouldn't even be able to hold a colored pencil to draw like this for very long, and my hand would hurt for days afterwards. And so this was just me enjoying using my hands and being able to be creative without restraint. If you are wanting to use your colored pencils with your pastels like I am, you'll want to make sure you're applying the fat over lean concept. That's a concept used in oil painting where you use your thicker layers of oil paint over leaner layers, thinner layers. You don't want to do a really thick layer of oil paint and then do like lots of thinner layers with lots of oil in them over the top. It just messes with the drying time and how they layer and glaze. When you are working with pastels, it's the same kind of concept. You want to use your harder pastels first, and then as you build up layers and it gets thicker and more of the tooth of your paper is filled in, then you start using your softer and softer pastels. Because colored pencils are so hard, those should be one of your first layers, and then you do your pastels over the top, starting with your pastel pencils and then your traditional pastels, and then you can get the really soft ones. Pan pastels are kind of this weird in between. You can put them over like colored pencil, but they're also so thin that you can put them underneath colored pencil as well. They're a little bit more flexible, but they're not very opaque. So just something to keep in mind. One of my favorite things about using sanded paper with my colored pencils is that you can blend them. They work really similar to how a traditional pastel pencil would work. So you can get a lot of overlap and use out of your tools and supplies. So I'm just taking my colored pencils and I am just blocking in some values. My light blues, navy blues for more of the shadow areas, violets, pinks, those kinds of things. And then I'm just going to take a soft tool and blend that in. And I don't even think I worried too much about using a clean soft tool. I used one of the ones that I used on the background, and I am just blocking in the basic shapes of the wing. So now I'm just going in and taking my pan pastels and blocking in color for this post that the raven is standing on. In my mock-up, it was more rectangular. I wanted it to be more of a cylinder shape, so that's what I did because I am in control of my world when I am painting. But I'm just layering up all different kinds of colors, and I'm doing all kinds of different colors because I want it to look a little bit more weathered at the end of this project. And so by layering up different smears of colors and different values, it's just going to look older and more weathered. I am keeping it darker towards the center because it's going to be backlit. And the moon is backlighting the raven and this post. And so they're going to have highlights along the edges of them and be darker towards the center. I had forgotten how much I loved doing pastels on my easel like this. It had been probably 4 years since I have done a pastel piece to this scale. The last one I did was a commission piece, and I just have really missed it. I didn't realize how much I was missing it until I was doing it. But this piece is for my house. I decided I wanted to create seasonal artwork that I could hang up in my home. We moved to this house a few years ago, and this is our first house that isn't some kind of condo or an apartment or anything like that. We own it. We own all of the walls and get to say what we're going to do with things. And because I'm an artist and because I can, I decided I'm going to create artwork that I can rotate through all season long and enjoy. So this is my Halloween piece for our front entry. Once I was done with the feet, then I started going in with my pastel pencils and started blocking in the details on the face. This was such a fun stage of the painting. It's one of my favorite parts of working with pastels, is starting to get all those little details in. And this is the Caran d'Ache pastel pencil, and I am just blocking in some of those highlights. Yes, pastels are opaque and you can layer a dark pastel over a light one, but pastels can mix on the paper. And so I find it's a little bit easier if I block in some of those highlights and make sure I preserve them, just so I can make sure those sections stay super bright. But then I'm going in with some of my darks, some of my blues, and I am having a lot of fun just throwing in different colors on this and just trying to get it really reflective. You can see me using a little piece of pastel. This is a piece that broke off my pastel pencil and I didn't want it to go to waste. If you've bought Caran d'Ache pastel pencils, you know you don't want to waste that pigment. So I am just going in and using it up, blocking in some of those shadows with this dark blue color. And when I am applying the color for the feathers, I am making sure I'm paying attention to the direction that those feathers are laying and the way they grow from the body. So the little short feathers underneath his neck kind of flare out. So I'm following that curve. The feathers that are for his chest are following that curve of his body. The wings curve outward a little bit more. It's really important to pay attention to that because that is what gives our bird dimension and shape. And by paying attention to the direction the feathers are growing and by mimicking that with our strokes of our pencil and pastel, we are going to more easily accomplish that bird looking dimensional or whatever object it is. Now I'm just back working on the moon, and you can see I've incorporated reds and pinks and yellows to it. I'm just having a lot of fun playing with color with this painting. And I am just using different kinds of pastel pencils that I have, and then I'll blend them out and just soften up those edges. I know it can be a little obnoxious to watch, but sometimes I'm working with quite dull pastel pencils, and that's because I tend to work with them until they absolutely need to be sharpened, unless I'm trying to get fine details in. Because it uses up so much pastel pencil to sharpen them, I don't want to waste them. And with sanded paper, it's so forgiving to blend and adjust markings that you make that I'm really just trying to get the pastel onto the paper, and then I can tweak and adjust its shape using tools like a clay shaper. As I'm working on the raven, to help it look like it's getting some like glowing effect from the moon behind it, I'm adding a lot of warm tones to the edges of the bird. So you can see me going in with like the reds on the edges and pinks and things like that. That's just to help give that glow and that backlighting effect. And now I'm taking that same effect and I'm bringing it down to the post that the raven is standing on. So you can see it's lighter towards the edges of the post And then as I move towards the center, it gets a little bit darker. I'm also playing with warm and cool values. It's warmer where the moon is lighting it, and then it gets more blue towards the shadow sections. I love how the raven is starting to get really dark in value, but you're seeing all the little colors peeking through from our layers that we've added. And so from a distance, it still reads black, but you can see all those hidden colors within it, and it just makes the raven kind of stand out from the dark background, and it makes it look like it's really shiny and reflective. Now I'm going in and really refining the moon. I'm really trying to clean up edges, cover any marks from when I did the transfer paper onto it, and really refine the shapes and where it joins up with the raven and cleaning up those edges as well. And I'm using different pastel pencils and my rubber shaper to kind of blend those out and soften lines, because I don't want too many sharp lines on it, because I don't want it to compete with the details that I'm adding to the raven. It's kind of interesting when I am making a painting, I tend to enter two different mindsets. There is teaching mindset, and then there is creative flow mindset. Teaching mindset is a project where I know I'm going to be teaching it in person or explaining it in a video, and as I'm working, I'm thinking through step by step, trying to figure out why I chose one thing versus another, and all of the intricacies and ins and outs of it. And I'm thinking about how I'm going to explain it to my students at their level. Then there's flow state painting, and that's what was going on here, where I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't thinking about how I was going to explain this to you guys on YouTube. I wasn't trying to figure out any step in particular. I was just going by how I felt as I was painting. And I would just kind of course correct if I felt like it wasn't looking like how I wanted it to be at the end. And that's a really fun state to be in as an artist, to just go off of intuition and your years of practice and not think about every little detail and step. And it's really hard to explain what I'm doing sometimes when I'm doing a piece like this where I was in that mindset, because I don't always know. I don't know why I chose one color versus another. It just felt right. One thing I do know about this painting, I really had to pay attention to the values. This painting is probably the one I had to pay attention to the values more than any other piece I've ever done, because the background is so dark and the subject matter is so dark, but I don't want them to blend together. I really had to pay attention to those subtle values and the lighting of this. And the best way to do that is by taking a picture on your phone, desaturating it. Don't do like a black and white filter, but just desaturate the image and look at the subject matter and see how much it stands out or if it's blending in. And I really had to do that. So you can see those little yellow highlights on the edges of the feathers. That really helped the raven come forward and look like it was, one, being backlit, but it also helped it separate from the night sky behind it. I had a lot of fun with this red pastel because I felt like it added a little bit more warmth to the raven, but also added a little bit of reflection. I added most of it towards the center where it was darkest, because it is a darker value, but that little bit of warmth it provides helps give that little bit of a reflection in the middle of our raven's body. So now I'm just going around and tweaking and adjusting different parts of the painting. So I blended a little bit on the night sky. I do like how I got those like ring light effects where there's rings coming off of the moon. I felt like that added a lot of texture and interest to the piece and kind of helped draw the eye inward. That's something I've been doing a little bit more, is if I am doing a piece where there's like one main focus, I've been trying to create brush strokes and marks that kind of still help draw the eye inward and kind of help it bounce around the painting. It's always interesting to me how the last 10 to 15% of a painting can take just as long as the first 85-90%, because you are being more particular, you're being a little bit more cautious, you're looking at your reference photos more, you're looking at the painting from a distance more, and taking breaks and then coming back to it. That's the stage I was at with this painting, where I was looking at it in different lighting and from different angles and all of those different things, because this piece was going to be hanging up in my house. And I can't tell you how many times I think I'm done with it painting, and then like I'll look at it a week later and be like, oh, I need to tweak and adjust that. And I'm going to frame this piece and hang it up on the wall of my house, and I can't really go tweak and adjust it once it's framed. So I had to really be sure I was happy and content with it before I was finished. And I'm really, really proud of how this painting turned out. It's really good to be back at painting and getting creative and pushing myself as an artist and getting back into that creative flow. So if you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more of what I create, please hit the follow. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.